There was a time when Intel used to be the undisputed leader of the CPU market. Go back 20 years, and for pretty much any server or personal computer, it was going to be Intel inside. Today, that's not the case. The x86 market is dominated by AMD, and today there are more alternative chips than ever before. ARM, Apple's own silicon, and on top of that, the lucrative AI segment and graphics chip segment is one where Intel is almost non-existent. This is down to a well-documented choice on Intel's side to not invest in innovation, but instead prioritize anti-competitive practices, cost restructuring shenanigans, and a bloated organization. But what doesn't get talked about as much is how bad their CEOs have been. Because if there's one role that could possibly be the source of all these problems, it's Intel's CEO and, to a large extent, the board as well. It probably all could have been avoided if they had just hired the right people. The thing is, they actually probably did hire the right person, but by then it was likely too late. I'm Mike. I've got 25 years of experience from tech, pharma, and consulting. I've held C-level roles in international companies. I have degrees in human resources, business, and psychology. And today it's about Intel, their terrible choices of CEOs, and also what makes a good CEO for a company. Let's get stuck in. Intel was founded in 1968, with their name being a contraction of integrated and electronics. In the 1980s, Intel were the company that established the x86 architecture for consumer and business applications. If you're old enough, you'll remember the days of the 286, the 386, and the Pentium processor. You might even remember when we went from only having 640 kilobytes of RAM and got 384 kilobytes of extra extended or expanded RAM. Those were the Intel days. All the way up to the new millennium, Intel was largely the only true relevant player in computing. In 2000, Intel had an estimated 90% share of the global personal computer CPU market. If you threw a rock at a computer back then, it was likely going to be a Microsoft operating system and Intel inside. They were also the backbone of the booming server market that kept the ever-expanding World Wide Web running. That's how dominant they were. But from 2000 onwards, Intel have been in a slow and initially imperceptible decline. There are excellent write-ups about the reasons for this. I would also point you in the direction of tech experts like Gamers Nexus, Linus Tech Tips, who do a much better job of explaining the details of their technology missteps. But in short, initially Intel just slowed down their innovation speed. They were market leading, so they just saw less reason to push the envelope in terms of product development. They spent time squashing competitors legally and through uncompetitive practices rather than through having superior products. They completely missed the bus when it came to mobile processors, leaving the door wide open for other players. They didn't just miss the bus when it came to AI and graphics. They didn't even get out of the door to walk down to the bus stop. NVIDIA today completely dominate that market in a way that nobody could have expected considering Intel's former position. And finally, even when they did try to build new architectures and nodes, they were hit by levels of production complexity that led to fundamentally bad products. On top of all of that, some products launched that were riddled with flaws. I'm one of those people that had an unstable i7-13900K where my motherboard needed a critical update to avoid massive chip degradation. With all of these missteps, strategic blunders, and product problems, Intel is in a very different place today than they were 25 years ago. Today, Intel is playing second fiddle to AMD in the CPU space. AI and graphics are dominated by NVIDIA, not Intel. The mobile landscape has ARM and Snapdragon and Apple Silicon. Intel is basically nowhere to be found. And the server market is more or less the same story. Their revenue in Q1 of 2020 was $20 billion. Their revenue in Q1 of 2025, 12.2. Revenue is down, profit is down, and they're laying off 25,000 employees out of a total of 109,500 people. They've even in practice been bailed out by the US government, who have now taken a stake in the former giant. Things are not great. Hopefully you're finding my channel as a product interesting and relevant to you. If you are, then please consider subscribing. It helps the channel massively. Thanks a ton. And that brings us neatly to the CEOs. Overseeing Intel's decline from the 2000s, we had Craig Barrett from 1997 to 2005, Paul Otellini, who was CEO from 2005, Brian Krzanich was CEO from 2013 to 2018, Bob Swan held the mantle from there on until 2021, where Pat Gelsinger took over. He was there until the end of 2024, where the current CEO, Lip-Bu Tan, took over at the helm. What's important to understand about this succession of individuals is the following. Up until and including Bob Swan, these individuals have progressively been worse and worse at understanding the core product. Craig Barrett had a PhD in materials science, something that was pretty important for a company specializing in fabs, nodes, silicon, and complex production processes. He rose through the ranks at the company and led their operations division prior to taking over as CEO. Brian Krzanich was touted as a man who understood the product, but his tenure was riddled with strategic mistakes. In many people's eyes, his tenure was objectively a disaster. He may have expanded Intel into multiple new business areas, but the number and size of the mistakes that were made under him was simply too numerous to count. After him, Intel hired a professional CFO with little to no experience in chips and even less knowledge about the engineering that goes into silicon, nodes, and wafers. Pat Gelsinger was a return to a CEO who did have insights into the core product. He led a strategic repositioning of Intel into a fab producer, which meant making stuff for others just like TSMC. He wasn't perfect, and due to lackluster performance and impatience on the board side, he too ended up being retired. Lip Butan, on paper, smart guy. Bachelor's degree in physics, master's in nuclear engineering. But here's the spoiler. Lip Butan, even with that fancy engineering-like degree, has been more of an investor and venture capitalist and businessman throughout his career, more than a developer of technology. He has headed up technology firms, but his biggest claim to fame has arguably been outside of the fab side and more related to semiconductors more broadly, with a strong slant to the funding and venture capital side of things. And this is important because there are only 4 kinds of CEO, and since 2005, Intel has done a pretty good job of consistently hiring the wrong one. There are only 4 kinds of CEO. The 4 CEO types are relevant at different stages of a company and have different strengths and weaknesses. None are inherently better or worse than others. They are always situationally relevant. There's the caretaker, the cost CEO, the growth CEO, and the product CEO. The caretaker CEO, as the name implies, is tasked with the role of taking care of a company. Often, more times than not, the caretaker CEO takes on the role of protecting a company and ensuring its continued stability in a predictable, stable, and usually not highly competitive space. These days, caretaker CEOs are not exactly common, but you do still see them in industries where the rate of technological innovation is low. Customers are loyal, and competition may be there, but the caretakers often oversee either the dominant player of the industry or head up a company that has a safe and predictable niche. The caretaker does one thing above all else. They provide continuity. They don't rock the boat. They don't try new things, and they stick to the tried and true formula because they don't have to. Rolex, the world-leading maker of luxury watches, is a company that has and benefits from a caretaker CEO. Rolex makes up 30% of all Swiss watch sales. They are the most recognizable luxury brand in the world, and at their price point, they are completely dominant. They don't need someone to shake things up. What they need is someone that ensures that continuity in a relatively slow-moving industry, and that is what their current CEO delivers. Then there's a cost CEO. These CEOs are rife in private equity-held firms. They also rise to the top in giant conglomerates where complexity is high and costs also are high. The cost CEO knows how to engineer, but only for cost and for profit. Private equity loves them because they are experts at structuring debt and at finding new and novel ways to cut cost. They are typically brutal in terms of cutting costs in terms of heads, but also in terms of investments. Their tenures are rarely, if ever, defined by new products, innovation, or technological leadership. In 99% of their tenures, their strategy will be marked by statements to the effect of laying the foundations for future growth. That's a euphemism for firing a lot of people and not coming up with new products because that would be too expensive. What they do leave behind are typically companies that are leaner, more efficient, with unnecessary fat stripped away, and an operating structure that is focused very much on a core set of products and priorities. The growth CEO. Brian Nickel at Starbucks. That's a growth CEO.
Oh yeah, sorry. So the Green Apron service model really was all about putting more partners back in the stores. So you've got more partners that are now deployed correctly, and we changed the focus from tasks to customer service.
Growth CEOs are there to market. They understand customers. They understand market dynamics, usually at least. They understand brand and product positioning. They're not necessarily product people in the sense that they live and breathe design or innovation or tech. Their lens is almost always outside in. And to use a quote that might actually not be a quote, they're the guys that understand that when the customer asks for horses, they work hard to deliver just that. Sales, marketing, customer focus is what these CEOs excel at, and they do well when a company has lost touch with its customer. The product itself might be good, but it just needs some tweaks and some improved packaging to hit the right audience. You'll see these CEOs in areas like fast-moving consumer goods, clothing, fashion to some extent, fast food, anywhere where tech leadership isn't necessarily as important as customer relevance and customer understanding. They'll also excel sometimes when the goal is to diversify a product portfolio, to see new markets and take existing offerings and tailor them to these new business areas. Finally, there's the product CEO. These are the Steve Jobses of the world. These are the people that don't just give that customer faster horses. They come up with the car and the combustion engine. These people are often engineers or at least technically minded. They can also be designers and artists. Jean-Paul Gaultier, Steve Jobs, and Pat Gelsinger. What makes them different from the growth CEO is that they do not have an outside-in customer perspective. They are focused on the thing, the product, its capabilities, its technical characteristics, and the potential of that product. You see them in startups, you see them in faster moving technologies, you see them in high-end fashion when avant-garde and creativity are at a premium. There are two things we need to be mindful of with these four archetypes. First, it's not either or. Any CEO is going to have some mix of these four archetypes, but there's always going to be a dominant trait. It's not like Steve Jobs didn't have a growth CEO in him, but it was the product first for him. Tim Cook at Apple as a successor is a strong mix of cost and growth. He's not really a product guy in the way that Steve was. Tim's strength has been understanding customers on the one hand, so growth and business efficiency, and also cost and, on specifically when it came to supply chain and production excellence. Novo Nordisk, who I spoke about in a recent video, have clearly gone for a new type of CEO as well, moving from the historical approach of prioritizing a mix of caretaker and product in Lars Rebien and Lars Fruergaard to Mike, who is a clear mix of cost and growth. It marks a significant shift in Novo Nordisk's priorities and ways of doing things. Second, all of these archetypes have clear weaknesses that can, in the wrong context, be damaging for a business. The caretaker CEO risks missing the bus and fails to transition the company to a new state when the market dynamics change. The cost CEO obviously neglects the product, causing stagnation in the company and leaves the company strategically vulnerable to competition. The growth CEO also underinvests in product. They go for more smoke and mirrors, and the growth CEO on occasion makes massive strategic missteps where their intuition proves wrong. New products and new markets do not catch hold, and often new products, especially when product complexity is high, are plagued by production and launch problems because the technical understanding isn't there. And the product CEO, sometimes they just make stuff that nobody wants. They make stuff that takes too long to get to market. They fail to compromise and they miss the bus. The nerds love them, but they end up building overcomplicated, over-engineered stuff that is too expensive to produce or is just not attuned to what the customer is ready for. And this is all relevant for Intel because, at a minimum, since Brian Krzanich, Intel has chosen the wrong CEO archetype for their business reality. And when they have chosen the right one, the board's patience was not there and their own insight into the product was lacking. Brian Krzanich, despite his technical background, was not a product CEO. He was a growth CEO. He saw market potential in new segments and areas and pushed Intel into these new, potentially lucrative segments. But his tenure was plagued with strategic missteps where the link between product and market just weren't sufficiently fleshed out, and the product development cycle was plagued with technical problems throughout his tenure. Bob Swan was a cost CEO through and through. As a former and almost lifelong chief financial officer, his skills were not in product and not in growth. He was good at only one thing: cutting cost and restructuring debt. As his secondary spike, I would guess it was caretaker, because under him, very little, if any, meaningful technological development was made at Intel. You have to remember that this is a sector where things take a lot of time from idea to final product, and a lot of years can pass. The effects of Bob's tenure were first truly seen under Pat Gelsinger, where it became painfully clear that Intel had fallen massively behind. Now Pat was a product CEO. This was a return to a product-led company, which in my opinion is without a doubt what Intel was in need of. Pat embarked on a journey to transform Intel into a fab producer. Pat was spot on, but he had two problems. First, by the time he walked through the door, Intel was already massively behind. He had to play catch-up in an industry where playing catch-up with a cost base of 109,000 employees and giant powered factories with long development lead times was massively costly. Being small in this space is, potentially an advantage. Being listed in a world where the stock market reacts instantly to cost overruns and rarely prices future theoretical potential particularly high, at least not here, always meant that he had a ticking clock on his tenure. Second, he probably went too big, as product CEOs sometimes do. He probably tried too many things at once, and the costs just got too big too fast, and the potential gains just didn't materialize in time. The patience from the board ran out. And then we have Lip Bhutan. The jury is out on this one, but I'll say so much. His first days have been defined by the behavior of a cost CEO, cutting back massively on a lot of the investments Pat set in motion, especially when it comes to fab production. This is probably necessary given the amount of cash Intel is burning through every single day. They're likely the size of a market leader with the cost of a leader. The problem is they're not the market leader. His strategic choice to refocus the business and prioritize manufacturing efficiency is also probably a correct assessment based on where Intel is right now. But the key question is, to me at least, and to industry insiders is, even if he does all that, how does he keep up pace in an industry where technological innovation is what keeps you relevant? One thing is making sure the chips you put out aren't filled with flaws. But if that's the bar, the problem is it'll still be a worse chip in terms of performance compared to the competition. In these first couple of months, there have been rumors of Intel spinning off parts of their business, including their networking business. That may be a right call and not one for me to make, but it does send a signal to me at least that there's more of a slice and dice sell-off approach to things than an ambition to actually build something. Tan has also signaled another interesting change in direction. Up until his tenure, Intel was very much a product-centric company in the sense that the company invested in making cool stuff and hoped that somebody would buy it. Tan has made very clear he wants to be a leader, but he wants the customer to call the shots. He has signaled a shift from we build something and hopefully it'll sell to if you tell us what to build and what you want and you pay for it, we'll build it for you. One of his quotes are, going forward, our investment into Intel 14A will be based on confirmed customer commitments. There are no more blank checks. Every investment must make economic sense. We will build what our customers need when they need it and earn their trust through consistent execution. To me, this is a shift from a product focus to a customer focus, which is not in itself a bad thing. But in the immortal but potentially misquoted words of Henry Ford, if I asked customers what they wanted, they would have told me they needed faster horses. A demand-driven logic is not technology-driven, and industry insiders are at a minimum taking a wait-and-see attitude to this approach. And the key point remains, as a minimum, since 2013, Intel has been led by CEOs that were not product-centric, and that has probably been the biggest mistake for them. This has been a sector where dominance was attained by having the best, fastest, newest, and most efficient product. The customer had been largely agnostic in terms of the label of the chip. They just want the best, the fastest, the most efficient, or some variant of those characteristics. Mobile prioritizes efficiency. AI prioritizes best and fastest. The moment Intel shifted away from bringing out the coolest stuff, they lost ground. They made a ton of other mistakes, and this is a hugely complex organization, but to me at least, this is one of the core problems of Intel and these CEOs. They just didn't understand or prioritize the product enough. And part of it stems to the board as well. There are currently 11 people on Intel's board. Frank Yeary, who has no experience with semiconductors or chips, he's a finance and advisory guy. Jim Gates, who knows tech a little, but semiconductors and fab production is outside of his comfort zone. Andrea Goldsmith has some relevance, but is far from an industry insider. Alyssa Henry comes from software. Eric Maurice is one of the few that have true semiconductor experience. Greg Smith is a CFO guy with experience from Boeing, and his time there was at best described as not great. Steve Sanghi has some knowledge of semiconductors and microcontrollers, but not at this scale. The reason I go through all these names is because of this. First, the previous board was, in terms of product understanding, terrible. Very few of them had any meaningful in-depth insight into the industry. The board was stacked towards investors and generic professional board members and finance optimizers, something that directly impacted the direction of the company, the choices of CEO, and probably also the hobbling of Pat Gelsinger's tenure. The new board, with Steve Sanghi and Eric Maurice being the new additions, is on paper a little bit better, but it's hardly a product-centric board. It's still got a strong lean towards optimization, cost-cutting, and generic business. This hasn't necessarily inspired industry insiders with confidence, and from online pundits like Linus from Linus Tech Tips to more established publications like Bloomberg, the jury is at best out on Lip Bhutan right now. Stock didn't rebound as a result of Tan's tenure. It's only now, here in early November, that Intel's stock has jumped. And why? Because of Raptor Lake, the new chips coming out soon, which were pioneered and developed under Pat Gelsinger's tenure, not Lip Bhutan's. It's the product from the last guy that they retired that's causing the spike. If Raptor Lake is a commercial success, the stock will go up more, but the key question is, will the decisions Tan makes lead to further product development that will get the same response? Or will his set of strategic decisions that he has already set in motion lead to a future void, leading to a further decline? Basically, will Raptor Lake be an upward blip on an otherwise downward trajectory, or will Tan's choices lead to the hoped turnaround? We're going to have to see. What we left, though, with is what to me stands as a clear example of how the wrong choice of CEO for the specific situation has made immeasurable damage on a company. With each successor, they've either made more bad decisions or been hamstrung by the mistakes of the past. Even if Lip-Bu Tan does turn out to be the product CEO that I believe Intel sorely needs, it may still be too late. That's all I had for this time around. Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe if you enjoy the channel. See you soon.